Welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. With me in the house today is Phil Dawson of Deakin University. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Chakwadi, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. Can you tell us a bit about your background and your work at Deakin, and maybe give us a little bit of what you do in terms of research at Deakin?
Yeah, so I am the Associate Director of the Centre for Research and Assessment and Digital Learning at Deakin University. Um, at Deakin, I do research in assessment and feedback, and within that assessment research, I do a fair bit around what we're calling now assessment security. So, being able to be sure that work that students say that they have produced is actually produced by them under particular circumstances that we'd like. I've got a background in education, higher education, and initially computer science, AI, computer security, that sort of stuff.
Oh, perfect. Thanks for throwing some light on what we're actually supposed to be talking about today, which is around assessment security. So my first question to you today is, and just for anyone who's watching this, is what is assessment security?
All right, so for a long time we've been interested in academic integrity. Academic integrity has a really important mission around, promoting students' capability to do their own work, to develop these capabilities around sort of professionalism, understanding, ethics, those sorts of things. And those are all really important. I've been working on another line of research that's around, I guess, the less nice side of things, but equally important side, assessment security. So it's about ensuring that cheating doesn't happen, and that if it does happen, trying to find out where it does and be able to take sort of countermeasures. And I want to say from the outset, you kind of can't have one without the other. They're both symbiotic, but they're also both in tension. Some things we might do to promote one might be worse for the other.
Oh, perfect. So that brings me to my next question around how we rethink assessments and looking at authentic assessment. So I'm wondering what the role would be of assessment security in informing authentic assessments.
Yeah, so I think authentic assessment's really interesting here. So, there's been some great research coming out of, say, Kath Ellis at the University of New South Wales that's found that authentic assessment won't stop contract cheating. There was, sort of a desire for authentic assessment to stop contract cheating. I'm not quite sure how we thought that was going to happen. I have to admit, I got swept up in that. If you search, there's an article in The Conversation from a few years back where I thought maybe it might work, but the evidence doesn't support that. So what we've previously thought of as, really great assessment practice, using authentic assessment, making tasks look like things a practitioner in the field would actually do, that's still really good. It's just not going to stop contract cheating on its own. However, something that I'm really interested in now, that I discuss in my book, Defending Assessment Security, is the idea of authentic restrictions. So sometimes in assessment, we design tasks where students are restricted from things. In an exam, there are restrictions. You can't access your notes, for instance, or if it's an open book exam, you can access your notes, but you can't access the web. Those are restrictions. I think it's really interesting if we start thinking about if the restrictions we place on tasks are authentic. Are they restrictions that someone who is a practitioner in the field would have, or are they kind of arbitrary restrictions that we've placed? And in the book, I argue when we use restrictions that aren't exactly authentic, it becomes harder to ensure those restrictions. And maybe we might consider not having them.
All right, Phil, it's very exciting, and in the grapevine, we've heard that your book is launching in the next couple of months. Would you like to tell us about your book, which is also focused on assessment security as well?
Yeah, thanks so much. I would love to. So the book is Defending Assessment Security in a Digital World. It's really looking at how, I guess, technology might be changing cheating and also might be changing the way that we secure assessment. It's got a deep dive into the latest work on cheating. It proposes the idea of assessment security that we've been talking about here, and then looks at it from some different perspectives. So, what might we learn from cheating in online gambling and esports that we can use to apply to dealing with cheating in higher education? What can we learn from artificial intelligence? How might some of these technologies be surveillance? That's drawing on the surveillance studies literature. The book is it's a scholarly research book with practical applications. So I think it's useful for anyone who's familiar with concepts around academic integrity, wants to learn more about how to really secure assessment. It's also great for people who are concerned about the negative consequences of some of these more surveillance-y type technologies that are coming out. And it's got some proposals on how we might be able to design assessment for security and structure assessment across degree programs. Mm-hmm. So people can find it through Googling, I imagine, or maybe we can put a link in somewhere.
Yeah, perfect. I'm just wondering and I can hear from what you're discussing now, it's the focus of assessment security is around contract cheating and cheating in general in terms of academic integrity. What would you say, or from experience, what are some best practices that you would share with other academics or even researchers in the field that would help promote a culture of assessment security in higher ed, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, promoting a culture of it, because we can get focused on some of the sort of micro practices, like have effective exam invigilation or those sorts of things without thinking of the culture. So I think culturally we want to think about actually having it at the front of people's minds. So some of the work that I've done with Wendy Sutherland Smith at Deakin University, we found that markers of student assignments can often get a pretty effective hunch when contract cheating has occurred. However, this is only going to happen if you encourage them to do that. If you have a culture where people know what contract cheating is, where people talk about it. So I think first and foremost, we want to have a culture where we talk about assessment security, we talk about cheating, we're kept up to date on sort of what the latest is in that field through activities like these videos. So I think we've got to know what's out there. That sort of culture of not just awareness, but maybe even curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point you raised there. I'm just looking at the current climate we are in right now with the pandemic and the move to remote assessments. Are there any best practices, or would you say it has become more relevant to rethink assessment to include security, and why?
Yeah, so I think the current climate and the switch to sort of emergency remote learning during COVID-19 has meant that we haven't been able to spend as much time with students face-to-face, seeing what they're doing and the circumstances they're doing it within. So there has been a really quite rational desire for more of a focus on assessment security. I think this is good. I think it's come with potentially a little bit of a panic and maybe a little bit of a push towards quite conservative modes of assessment. Mm-hmm. So, there's been quite a rise in the use of remote proctored examinations. I'm not saying remote proctored exams are a bad idea, but we might want to think if they're the best idea for the given circumstance. If we traditionally had an exam, the logical approach is not necessarily to switch to a remote proctored exam. It might be that there are other approaches that might be, potentially just as secure, but not come with some of the downsides of remote proctored exams in terms of, students feeling like they're surveilled and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think with proctoring and all other means of strategy or other strategies to actually promote assessment security, it has become even more prevalent or relevant for institutions to actually rethink assessments, and also consult with most likely people of your caliber, and to understand how they can best avoid this contract cheating and any form of misconduct in terms of academic integrity. I'm just curious to know, and maybe people watching would also want to know, is um, has there been any work or research to support the impact of assessment security in enhancing learning for our students?
Oh, I think that's really interesting. So with assessment security, I think we want to focus our assessment security efforts on the tasks within a degree program that really matter in terms of accreditation. So, in terms of the university making the judgment that someone has achieved specific learning outcomes, those are the places we want to focus assessment security resources. And that might be an exam or an invigilated remote proctored exam, or it might be a mini Viva or something where you submit a piece of work and then you discuss the work with them and really interrogate, did they really do this and do they really understand it? So those are some, attempts at higher assessment security. If we do think about assessment security from that degree level or programmatic level, we can then start to not worry so much about assessment security for other tasks, and we can focus more on learning. Traditionally, we've tried to secure every individual subject or module or unit within a degree. We've tried to put an exam at the end so we can be sure people did everything. I'd like to see us switch away from that to having fewer high security moments, but being really sure about those, and having a lot more assessment for learning throughout degree programs where maybe we don't scrutinise students so much, we focus on promoting their capability with academic integrity.
Mm. Oh well, that's quite an interesting and broad area. I'm sure someone else is going to pick up on that in terms of research and provide us with some resources to do this better, which I think is really crucial at the point. My last question for today's session is looking at areas in terms of feedback literacy and knowing that at Turnitin we're all about citizens of integrity. So my question is, how do you currently support feedback design, feedback literacy, and assessment security, especially in the online space?
Oh, I think that's a really interesting and complex area, which is great. So firstly, anyone interested in ideas around feedback design, there's a great Australian federally funded project led by Michael Henderson that I was a part of. Feedbackforlearning.org is the website for that project, and it's got some great stuff on how you can support really effective feedback practices. So I would encourage people to check that out for feedback design. When we say feedback design, we're thinking, not just to focus on writing really useful feedback comments for students. We're thinking about designing feedback systems so that students really do make use of that feedback information and learn from it and do better. Because feedback's only effective where it has effects. There's a great quote by Dylan William, which is that feedback should be more work for the recipient than it is for the donor. So we've got to think with feedback about what do students do with it. And when we think about that, we're thinking about also their feedback literacy, their capability to seek out, understand and make use of feedback, and also work with their emotions through that process, which can be really difficult. So we've got all of those things going on. And then we've also got assessment security in there. And, I would view, say, originality reports as part of what a student needs to be feedback literate with. Students need to be able to understand what those mean when they see them. really how to process them. And that's not an innate thing that we're all born with. So that's something that we need to work with students around, how the outputs from some of these assessment security technologies are a form of feedback information that they need to know how to use.
Great. I'm just gonna want to end this episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin by quoting something you just mentioned, which I thought hit a nerve, which is feedback is only effective when it has effects. So thank you for your time today, Philip, and I hope everyone watching has some takeaway from this session. We look forward to continuing our conversation with Integrity Matters by Turnitin.
Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you.